Boker Tov. Purim Sameach. Today's Purim Katan. You have to be Sameach, Mishnech Zadar Arba Simcha. According to the rabbis, both Adars included, right? And especially today, Purim Katan, we have to be Sameach despite the difficult times that we're going through, right? We have to make every effort to be as happy as we can. Okay, let's see here. I don't seem to see anybody else, so I'm wondering if I'm in the right place. Huh? Yeah, we're in the right place. The question is, where are they? All right. Right. We're today's Daf is Daf Kufya Gimel Baba Kameh. As we learned for Achenukah basis on some should be yes.
They drank too much last night. That's why they're not there.
No, yeah, I know. I'm just saying I might be in the wrong place here. Different groups, and I'm not sure. Usually by now there's somebody else here. I'm not sure what I'm doing. I think it's correct. Okay. Amar Rav Chisda, about 12 lines down the page. Amar Rav Chisda, Kovensman, Sheni B'Chishvat. We're talking about subpoenaing somebody to come to court for a case against them. So let's say we give them time. We tell them that the court sits on Monday, Thursday, and Monday. So we give them 3 days, 3 court dates, not 3 days in a row. We give them on Monday, Thursday, and Monday. Zimna, v'zimna basa zimna, a time and another time followed by another time. But l'machar, if they don't come, if the person does not come to court after 3 days, kasfinam, then we write him this subpoena, this warrant that will result in excommunication and the ban if he doesn't show up, if he doesn't pay what he owes. Ravasi ikla bei Rav Kana. Ravasi attended the house of the yeshiva of Rav Kana. Chaza, he saw women, the Azmana Ladina, Befanya Ubetzafra. She was summoned to court at night, and in the morning, and then the very next morning, Tzafra Kasavala Pischa. She didn't show up the next morning. They already wrote this psicha, this warrant against her. Amarle, Lo Savalamar Lahad Amar Chisda. Don't you have kind of hold of this? Sort of Chisda said, Kovensman Sheni Chamishi B'Chamishi. Give him 3 court days: Monday, Thursday, Monday. Amarle, Hanimili Gavra the Onis V'Lesamasa. That's for a man. A man is more difficult because he's traveling and he's not in town. Of course, in those days, women didn't travel. Avalissa, women didn't travel alone in those days. Avalissa, a woman keeping these muscles, and she's in town, lost, and she doesn't show up. That's already moredity. She's already showing that she's recalcitrant, that she is rebellious, and she doesn't want to, and she's not listening to the court. So we don't give her any extra time. But men who traveled, it was a different situation. Okay, so then the man who traveled would give him 3 days, but the woman didn't travel. Today, things would be different because women travel alone as well. Amar B'Yudah, Lo Yivna Zimna, Lo B'Yam. So we don't summon them to court, not during Nisan, but Lo B'Yam Tishri. These are in the harvesting seasons. There's people out in the fields. Don't make them come to court in those days. Lo Mali Yom Tov, not Erev Yom Tov, Lo Shabbos, not Erev Shabbos. Aval Minisan LeBasrei Minisan. But let's say in Nisan, you can summon them to come to court after Nisan. Of Yom Tishrei, Lebasa Tishrei, and you can summon them to come to court in Tishrei for after Tishrei. In other words, in Nisan, you can summon them to come to court in Iyar, and in Tishrei, they can come to court in Cheshvan following that. And then you do set a time for them. The Mali Shabbos Lebasa Shabbos also come in. You don't tell them on Friday to come in on Sunday or Monday. My time about to the Shabbos, everybody's busy on Fridays. You can't you going to the market. And if you tell them something on Friday, they won't remember, to come afterwards. Don't tell them when they're busy. Also, the people who attend the Archikala, the people who learn in their certain seasons, they have times when they learn Torah. So you also don't set a time for the people who attend those sessions during those sessions, because that's their learning time. 30 days before the regalim, and before each of the regalim, they would also attend shiurim to learn about Yontif. So the people who come to Hashem, you don't set a time for them. Also, the comment of Nachman, when they would come before Rav Nachman while he was attending or giving the shiurim, plaintiffs would come for Rav Nachman on the day of the Kala to try to find the litigants that they're looking for, the defendants. Amalei would tell them, did I gather everybody here to learn for you guys to prosecute your cases? That's not the case. The people who come to learn, come to learn. You want them to, if you want to subpoena them, have them come some other times. But today, today when there are Ramaim, people who cheaters, who say, "Oh, I'm going to the Shiur," they tell their wives they're going to the Shiur and they're going somewhere else, right? We suspect that they are, we don't take them at their word. They're going to the Shiur. If they're not really coming to the Shiur, then you could subpoena them to court at that time. So in our mission, we said again, if there was, remember, the thing that you just asked about before, Avram, if the father had left over something with achrayus, that usually means karka. That's how Rav interpreted it, that it's only if it's karka that was obligated to his, karka that was obligated to the owner of the, to the person in exile who the stuff was stolen from. Then even after the father died, you can make him pay. You can make the children pay from that karka. That's how Rav learned. But before that, we had another opinion. More brings it down now. We quoted it the other day. Masla Rebbe Rav Shimon Brei, Lo davar sheyesh bo achrayus mamish. We're not talking about something literally that is karka, that's obligated. That's what we call it. Something yesh bo achrayus. The only thing that's really as achrayus is karka, because that can't be stolen, can't be totally destroyed. Sheyesh bo achrayus mamish elafilu para v'chorish ba. Even if he has a cow that can be used for plowing, or chamor machamer achrav, or a donkey that could be used for sabalut, for schlepping, for transport. Chayv lachs may cover the mask return because of the cover of the father. Boy minei Rav Kana may Rav. Mito meisvel. What about a bed? He's got to lay down on it. That's not as public. It's not as obvious. Or shulchan ba'okalav, or a table. Things that are finite, specific items that have value to them. If the father left that over, will you say also that because of honor for the father, you have to return those? Give to a wise man, and he will be even smarter. Meaning, it doesn't mean only things that are seen out in public. It means anything like that could be used, that could be that's obvious if people see it, that it would be people will see it, and it would be embarrassing to the father that the dead father had stolen these items. Okay, Ein Port says the Mishnah, Ein Port lo mitevas hamochsim below mikis shal gabon. We don't collect money. We don't exchange money. We should say we don't exchange money, neither from customs collectors. The customs collectors were generally considered to be dishonest. So if you want to change money, like let's say you had larger coins and you want to change it to smaller coins, to prutot, let's say, you don't do it with people like that, with tax collectors. Nor from tax collectors, either customs collectors or tax collectors. And we're talking about even Jewish people. They know the man suck. You don't accept any charity from them, because it's assumed that what's in their safe box is all stolen, and you don't have enough of them. But let's say he has money in his house. Even the mafia keeps their accounts separately. Their personal and business accounts are kept separately. So if you take it out of his wallet, or he's in the shuk, he's not at his place of business, then you would accept that. Tana, avol dinner, but you could give him money v'nosin l'sashar. Let's say you're not giving him. Could you make change? Give me change. Here's $1. Can you give me 100 pennies? Nothing like that. Let's say he says you have to pay 50 cents, and you only have $1. You can give him the $1 and get change, because then you're like saving it from them. Otherwise, what are you going to do? Give them the whole $1? There, it's different. But if you're just asking to do you a favor and make change for you, that you're not to. Gemara says, why can you not do business with customs collectors? They're following the law of the land. There's a rule of customs, right? You got to pay customs when you bring stuff into the territory. Amrav Chanina, Arkana Shmuel, we're talking about not like today where there's a fixed amount, for this and this item, you pay this amount of customs, but rather there's no set amount. He has no limit. So therefore they take whatever they can, and they're considered cheaters and gazlanim. Not even, he wasn't even appointed by the government. He didn't have the government. We'll see, they were either appointed by the government or they got the concession from the government, but he just got it himself. He gets that there was some guns, like, ruffians, like terrorists, crooks. They stood on the border and they said, you want to pass? If you don't want to get shot, pay what you want. So we're talking about cheaters over here. Some learn that it's going on the following case. person should not put on climb. Many times, say this has happened at airports. They say you can only take on so much carry-on luggage, right? So you put on a few coats, and you put the tuna cans in your pockets. I've done this, so if you're not, it's not carry-on. Why is it fair? I'm 170 pounds and that guy's 350. Why should he? He's also carrying on more weight than me. Why shouldn't he have to pay more, right? Why do you only talk about the carry-on luggage? So people do that. So what they would do is, in order to avoid customs, they would put on a lot of the clothes and say, this is not goods, this is my coat, let's say it was Klein. You're allowed to sell Klein to Goyim. You're allowed to own Klein. You can have enough from Klein, you just can't wear it. So it says over there, it says, even on top of 10 begodim, like where you're not really getting enough from it. The idea is on top of 10 begodim. What's the idea of Klein? You can't, for example, if you act as a mannequin, you're trying to show somebody a goy, you're trying to sell them something. You put on the coat to show them what it looks like, and it's got Klein in it. So you're allowed to because you're not having enough from it, right? You're just showing it. So here, let's say you're wearing it, but it's on top of 10 other begodim. So it's to escape the customs. It says you shouldn't do that. Now, you shouldn't do that. Now, that's what the mission is. Masnis, this mission that says you shouldn't do that is local, doesn't go like David. Tanya also you can't. You're allowed to because you're not having enough from the coat. So you're allowed to do it for that. So that's what the Bryce was talking about. Can you put on a coat made out of Klayim to escape mechas? So Bishlomo, lenient Klayim. I understand the Klayim. Here's a machlok. I have no intention of having enough from the coat. I'm just like, I'm like wearing it like a mannequin just to show somebody. Or in this case, I'm trying to escape meches by wearing it instead of putting it in my bag. So one says, like Reb Shimon, famous machlokas Reb Shimon Yud by Shabbos, was also. So that's the machlokas. Reb Akiva says is mutter like Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon says the name of Reb Akiva, that's where he got it from. And the Tanakhama says, no, you're not allowed to. How are you allowed to escape meches? You're cheating. You're trying to avoid the customs. You go in the green line when you really did bring in goods instead of the red line at the airport, right? We have a cloud everywhere except for Eretz Yisrael. Everywhere except just Dina Machusa, Dina applies. We had this discussion before. The law of the land is law of the land. You're not allowed to cheat on your 1040. You're not allowed to cheat on your taxes. You're not allowed to cheat. The law of the land is law of the land. So some say this is where the machlokus was, not really machlokus, but what's the reason why you're allowed to cheat? Before we said we're talking about because they have dirty money in their hands. So because of that, you shouldn't do business with them. What do you mean? Aren't they honest? No, we're talking about where they had no specific amount or they just set up business on their own. So here they're saying this is where Shmuel said his point, that how are you allowed, forget about, you having enough from the client, that's a machlokas of Hashem Skambas Mutter Aser. How are you allowed to cheat the mechas? The answer is we're talking about cases where these customs collectors are cheaters themselves. He has no set amount. Again, it's a muchas who got up on his own. He's not even authorized by the government. And some say that this issue was: is it a customs collector who has no limit, who has no boundaries, or is it simply just somebody who set up himself? Some say it's going on the following thing. Let's say you have some food. And we're dealing with Jewish crooks. There have been some in the past. And they say, listen, you got to pay customs on this food. And they say, no, you can make an eder, or either murderers or people who steal and pay for it, or whatever or customs collectors. You can say, this is truma. You can't eat this. You're not a Kohen. I swear it's truma. Can you do that? So some say you can because they're stealers. They're going to take away your food. Or Shisha Besamelcha belongs to the king. Don't touch this stuff; you'll get in trouble. Even though it's not true, even though it's not really true, it doesn't belong to anybody. Well, the muhsin, what do you mean? How can you lie to customs collectors? It's the same discussion that's going on a different law. It's a customs collector who has no fixed amount. He's talking about a muchas who he's not authorized by the government. He got up on his own. Rav Ashi Amar, the muchas kanani. We're talking about a goyish tax. Until now, we've been talking about a Jewish tax collector. Rashi says we're talking about a goyish tax collector. So what? Is that really isn't that also forbidden? We'll see. The Tanya Yisrael, but Knani honest. Yisrael and a violent, let's say, goy. Now a goy who doesn't shabol din. Talking about a Jew and a goy have a fight, and they have said there's some argument between them, and they come together. If you can find the Jewish man innocent by the laws of Israel, it's okay. So find that you should defend him that way. But Amorlo kachtinenu. This is our law. According to our law, the Jew is innocent. If you can find him innocent by goyish laws, be the kanam zakeu. According to your own law, the Jew is forbidden. Bimlav, if you can, born on the kiflin, you could cheat him a little bit. You can come along with chokhmah, Rashi says, with subterfuge, and make some, try to get around it to find in favor of the Jew. You can't cheat in the Kiddush Hashem. You're going to cause a chil Hashem if you kind of try to cheat against him. But Akiva, time of Kiddush Hashem, the whole reason is because Kiddush Hashem. If it wouldn't be for Kiddush Hashem, you're allowed to. The Gezel Kanani mi shari. Are you allowed to steal from a guy? But Tiny Lunar Mashim and Davar said Darsha Akiva. Akiva himself darshan. What did he say? Shabbat Mizafir, when he came from that town, he said, Menayin legezel Kanani shah. So how do you not allowed to steal from a guy? If a Jewish man is sold to a guy, it says after he was sold, you should redeem him. You shouldn't forcibly take him away. You can't come and force him away. You're not allowed to force him, to steal him away. In other words, the guy bought him fair and square. You should redeem him, but you can't steal him. You can't kidnap him away from the guy. I might think that maybe the Kanani will say, okay, you can pay me whatever, maybe he'll ask for some exorbitant, unbelievable price, like Pidyon Shrim that we have now. I might think he might be able to do that. You got to make a fair price. In other words, make a cheshbon according to what he was bought for. Then you could you can't if you bought him for $100 because the Jewish man owed him money and bought him for $100 or was poor or whatever. You can't if he demands $1 million, you don't have to pay that. You have to a fair price. But the point is, what do you see? You're not allowed to steal him from a guy. You can't steal from a guy. So first, his answer is no. That's speaking about a ger toshav. This you can't choose. What's a ger toshav? Is a guy who lives in Eretz Yisrael and has agreed to abide by the Zion mitzvos and does not, worship idols, etc. Amalei Abaya, what do you mean? Only by ger toshav must you deal with him fairly, and not by a real guy like a Rav Kachavim. Both Kananim and ger toshav in that pasuk, because it says l'cha, right? It says lo l'cha el ger. Says if he sold not only to you. What does that mean? They sold not only to a Jewish person, el lager. If he sold to a ger, shenem lager, below lager tzedek. We're not talking about ger tzedek meaning a real a convert. El lager toshav, right? Sold to a ger toshav. That's a guy who lives in Eretz Yisrael and abides by the Zion mitzvos and deals fair and square. Shenem lager toshav. Mishpachas ger, it says, oh, the mishpachas ger family. So it tells you that these laws that you have to redeem him back fairly, not only when he's sold to another Jew or sold to a ger toshav, but even to another kachavim. When it says la'eker, there's he's sold to the church himself, sold to the goy shavodazar church, and in all those cases you have to feel square. Elamarabalo kasha kam b'gzelo. It says here, you can't steal from him. That's what we're talking about. You can't steal from him. But we're talking, when he says over here, are you stealing from him? One is hafkas havasa. One is cancellation of his debt. What do we mean by that? That there's a debt owed. Rashi says, she'ein gezel mamish. It's not really stealing. All right. So then you're like a chil Hashem. There's no chil Hashem of riach mechas avik havasa also. In other words, what are you allowed to do if he's a guy? You're allowed to escape the mechas from him if he's the customs collector. And you can also avoid cancellation of a debt. Not really direct stealing, but if it's cancellation of a debt, that you're allowed to. That's what we're talking about here. Amalei Abaye, Eved Ivri Havasu. If it's an Eved Ivri, is that considered? That's like a debt also because he was sold also because of a debt. Says Rabbi Tameid Amarava Eved Ivri Gufo Kanui. In other words, an Eved Ivri. We're talking about an Eved Ivri over here. If he's an Eved Ivri, a Jewish man, so Jewish, that's also, he says, Eved Ivri Guf Kani. Even if he's a Jewish man, his guf is acquired. In other words, even by an Eved Ivri, if he sold a Jew, that's also his body is owned, so to speak. Even though for a mitzvah he's a full Jew, but his body is owned by the owner. So that's even by a Jewish man that's sold to a Jew, you're not allowed to force him out. The answer is that's also just cancellation. You're saying cancellation of debt is allowed. He says no, it's not simply cancellation of the debt. And Eved Ivri is owned by the guy. So we're not talking about a cancellation of debt. This that you can't steal. You can't steal from them. You can't steal. You got to buy them back fairly and squarely. But if it's simply cancellation of a debt, that's similar to a customs collector where we're lenient with that rule. Amar Bibi Bar Gil Amar Shimon Chasida Gezel Kanani Osir. You're not allowed to steal from a guy. That's the rule. Some Mefarshim say that's even a D'oraisa. Some say it's only Drabanan. Rambam says Drabanan, but the point is that you're not allowed to steal from a guy directly. Here we're talking about, cheating on a customs collector or canceling a debt is a little bit more lenient, but you can't steal from directly. Avadaso, but if he lost an item, there's no obligation to return it to him. Zelo also, why do we know that if you steal from it, it's also the Amrafuna Menayim Gezal Shoas? How do we know? Shneimar, V'chaltes Kolam Asher Shalokecha Nosin L'cha. Bisman Shem Mesur L'cha, and B'yadacha, when they're given over to you, and the Mefarshim claim this is at a time of war. When you're warring with these people, then you're allowed to take whatever's theirs. Because we're talking about a wartime. Right? How do you know Gezal Tani is also? Because it says when they're given over in your hand during the time of war, then you can eat whatever you want. But if you're in a time of war, you're not allowed to steal from them. So he's based this on a pasuk. Could be if you hold it to Rabbanan, this could be an asmachta. Avadosa maturis, but you're allowed, if he lost an item, you're not obligated to return it to him. How do you know that an item is lost by a goy, you're allowed to keep shenemar l'chol avedas achicha, right? Any law, when it talks about returning a lost item, it's an aveda of your brother, your Jew. L'chicha tamachzer. You don't have to return it to them. Maybe that's if it's not in your hand. In other words, you see an item, you don't have to make an effort to return it. You don't have to go run after it and try to, lost his dog or whatever. You're not mechuyev to. But if it's in your hand, maybe you have to return it. If it's found that it's in your hand, in other words, even if it's in your hand, you're only responsible to return it to a Jewish, an item that belongs to a Jewish person, not belongs to a guy. If it's a time when there's a chil Hashem involved, I feel that's also. The truth is, when there's a chil Hashem, almost anything is but not necessarily. In other words, if a person says, "Oh, don't wear tzitzis publicly because it looks like it's like a chil Hashem talk." It's no such thing. You're doing a mitzvah. That's not a chil Hashem. But there's a time when, if you're talking about Jewish and Goyish relations, like we said, you can't steal from them directly. You can use some subterfuge, but you can't steal from them directly. And the same thing, he says, Aveda is lost item, you're not mechuyev to return. But if there's a chil Hashem involved, then you even have to return his item. Amar Shmuel, ta'usa mutaris. Pardon? Well, that's not necessarily the case. If it's a lost item, right? Even a Jewish item that's not identified. Let's say you find a dollar bill on the floor here.
You can't identify it, then you can keep it.
Even if it belongs to a Jew, and as if you found it in the shul, it obviously belonged to a Jew, right? You can't. There's no identifying marks on it. You make an effort to return it. That coat's been here for a few days, right? That lost coat, somebody left it there. Obviously, no, I don't want it. Obviously, got cool. Maybe it starts raining again, they'll come and claim it. Anyway, the point is though that if it's a lost item, you're not mechuyev to return it to a guy, unless there's a chil Hashem involved. Like, let's say it's got his name on the back, and you're walking around with it. It looks like you stole it. It could be a chil Hashem. Ta'usa materis, they make a mistake, it's mutar. I'll give it a perfect example. You go to the store, the cashier made a mistake, right? So you're obligated to tell he made a mistake, especially I'm talking about when it's against their favor. It's in your favor, right? Usually it's in their favor.
Yeah, but even then, and I've had it
Yeah.
where
You tell them and they don't want to hear about it.
Too much money.
Right. They don't want to hear about it because they'll get in trouble or something, right? They're afraid that they don't want to. Many times that happens, right? But you're obligated to tell them if it's a Jewish person, you're obligated to tell them. You can't start stealing from them, even if they made a mistake. My argument about people who cheat against you, or is an honest mistake. It's an honest mistake if sometimes it's in their favor and sometimes it's in your favor. But when it's always in their favor, it's not an honest mistake. It's no longer not a mistake, right? So here, if they made a mistake and you're in a goyish supermarket and they made a mistake and it's in your favor, you're allowed to keep that. Kihad Shmuel, Zavan Mikute Lakned, he bought from a goy a golden bowl, B'mar de Parsla, as if it was a copper one. In other words, it was mislabeled or whatever happened. He bought a gold one, and it was at the price of a copper one, Bedal Zuze, and the price was marked 4 zuz. The Ivlale Chazuz, and not only that, he only gave him 3 zuz, and the guy accepted that. In other words, he made a mistake, and he accepted that. Rav Kana Zavan Mikuti Meyav Esrach, he bought 120 barrels, say barrels of wine, whatever. The Meyav for and he said, he bought 100, but he got 120. But Ivlale Chazuz also, he even paid less a little bit, and the guy didn't say anything. He made a mistake. You're allowed to. Amalei. Why? Because he said, I rely on you. Sometimes you could say that the Jewish guy said, look, I rely on you to count it. And Rashi brings another shot that the guy said to the Jew, I rely on you. But he understood that it was his mistake. It was his mistake. You're allowed to. Rashi says, Rav Kana Lakuti. Rav Kana said to the guy, I rely on you. Another shot is that he said to Rav Kana, I rely on you. The point is that the guy made a mistake. You're allowed to keep it. Ravina Zavan Dikla, Huvakuti. He bought a tree. Him and a guy together, they bought a tree. Let's to chop it up, and they were going to use it, for wood. So Ravina said to his servant, after it was chopped up, go get the parts at the bottom near the roots. Why? Because they're thicker. Now, why? Because minyana yada by the kuti minyana yada. The kuti only counts the pieces. Let's say they chopped up a tree to 100 pieces. So Ravina said, try to get the thicker ones. They're better firewood. They'll last longer. Why? Because the guy only counts. He says, I want 50 pieces. Cut it up to 100 pieces. He doesn't care if they're bigger or small. And you're allowed to. In other words, it's his mistake, or he doesn't mind. Rav Ashi Abikazaburg was on the road. Chaza Shivshe de Gufna. He saw some branches of a vine tree, the Pardisa in an orchard, and it was hanging over into the street. The Tali Beki Tufe Dinve, and hanging over in the street on the road. Hanging over, the vine was in private property, but it was hanging over into public property, and he saw there a cluster of ripe grapes. Amal Sham, he told the Sham, Zil Chazi, go see, Idukuti Ninu, I see. If it belongs to a goy, bring me some. Idi Yisrael Ninu, if it belongs to a Jew, I see, don't bring it. Shamahu Kuti, the Kuti owned it, was in the garden, heard him say that. He was sitting in his orchard, and he heard the conversation. Amrlei, he said, the Kuti Shari? Because I'm a Kuti, I'm a non-Jew, you're like Kuti here sometimes could be in a Kanani. He says, because I'm that, you're allowed to steal from me? Amalei, no. Kuti shakul dami. I'll tell you, I meant this. A Kuti takes money. Yisrael lo shakul dami. I just said if it belongs to a Jew, I'll take some because he doesn't mind if it's hanging over into the street. I didn't mean to cheat you. And Tosa says that he wasn't just saying that. Nira Louis says, right, it's the Tosus in the third Tosfos. He wasn't lying now. That was his Rishek Moshe Shalakuti. Below Moshe Kuti Sover, the Kuti thought that he was going to steal. Dim Kanayis over the Gazal Kuti Mutter. And as he thought Gazal Kuti is Mutter, then Chilk Ben Geneva Exela, the Geneva Ikachel Hashem just look she had a self. Kalan Shmaita lo I see Hanu the Asri Gazal Knani below my see tonight the Makabashari. Some say the Shitas who say that if you receive it from them, you're allowed to. We're all saying over here that gezel of a goy is absolutely forbidden. Whether it's the rice or drabanan, you can't steal from a goy. A mistake that he makes, it's okay. You're allowed to, if he made a mistake or he doesn't mind or whatever, that's okay. But you're not obligated to return his lost item unless it's a chil Hashem. You're not allowed, and you're not obligated to correct his mistake. Gufam Shmuel, Dina Machusadina. The law of the land is the law of the land, and this applies on all areas outside of Eretz Yisrael. We've discussed this before. That's the law of the land. That's Shmuel's halacha dina machuzah dina. That's why, you have to pay your taxes and you shouldn't be cheating, etc., etc. Amar Rava, Tata, what's the proof to that? The Kotli Dikli, because the Goyim, in other words, the rules of Dina Machusa don't only apply to your 1040, to your taxes. It applies to all rules that are set in the land, including eminent domain. You remember that from ninth grade civics or whatever, that they're allowed to, cut down land and they can expropriate land, whatever that they need for the roads. And here's an example of similar. They cut down trees. The government cuts down trees, and they use it for bridges. They cut down your tree and they take these large logs and they make bridges. And we use them. We pass over. We go on these bridges. We use them. If that would be stealing, we wouldn't be allowed to partake in it. Obviously, that's the law of the land. Maybe the reason you're allowed, maybe it is really stealing. Maybe Dina Machus is nothing, and the government's not allowed to do that. But simply because the owners of the trees are mayayish, they give up. They abandon hope because the government took it. They can't stand up against them. Now Tosis learns that Amalei, so he answered him. He says maybe it's because they give up. So Abai answered him, right? Abai said, so Amalei, so Shmuel said, right? Rava said the proof is that they cut down trees and you use those trees when you cross over on the bridges. So Abai said maybe because the owners have given up hope. Amalei, if it wouldn't be for Dina Machusa, how could they be giving up hope? The Tosis learns they should have. What do you mean? If there's no Dina Machusa Dina, why should the owner give up hope? He should demand whoever passes by. You're passing by on stolen trees, on stolen logs. That's how should they? Why should they give up if they're not Dina Machusa Dina? Rashi learns it more of a halachic thing. Rashi says it's not Yush because the logs are still the same logs. A tree, you cut it down, it's still called logs. We had back before in Sadik Love that it's still called a log. That's not a shini masa. The tree is a tree when it's standing. When you cut it down, when you just make it into logs, you didn't cut it down to pieces and boards and 2x4s. It's still a log. So all you have is yish. Yish without shinui rishus and without shini masa is not maknit. Still belongs to the original owner. So how could you be traveling on the road? That's how Rashi learns it. Okay, even so, the Gemara says, okay, wait a minute. I understand Dina Machus Dina. And if it wouldn't be for Dina Machus Dina, either the owners of the trees could protest and go to court and claim you stole my trees, the government stole my trees, or because they're not miyayish anyway. Must be because Dina Machus Dina, they're allowed to. So the Gemara but the king says, why? That they're still, when they cut down these trees, they didn't do it legally, even though the government's allowed to legally cut down the trees. That's only if they do it in a fair manner. They take trees from all areas. Malcolm, the king said, go zilba katlu mikolbagi, cut from all the valleys, cut down an equal proportion of trees. The inu they take it from one, they go to the first valley that they come to, the first area, and they cut down all this guy's trees. They didn't go to all the other ones. It's not, if they need trees, they should do it fairly, cut down some from all the areas. And here they cut down one. That's the shlucha de malka kamalka, the messenger of the king. In other words, the agent of the king is like the king himself. They're not going to bother. He has the same, once he's granted the authority to cut down the trees, he cut down whatever trees he wants. The owners of the trees, they cause their own loss. They should have collected money. If you need money for the trees or to buy them or whatever, they should have collected from everybody equally. And paid it off. In other words, if you left your trees available and you didn't try to collect the money for the government, it's your own fault. Amarava, Manda Mishtakach Beidori, a similar halacha. He says, let's say there's four partners in a farm, and three of them took their belongings, took their crops, and brought it into the house. And one guy still had it in the barn or out in the field. The one who's found like in the granary in the field, para mensa the malki, he's got to pay off the government's tax, and then he can go claim from the other ones because who's out, whoever the government's going to come and show up. When they show up at the farm, they're going to take whatever they can. If this guy who took it from has three other partners and they already took their share, he can still demand it back from them. because that's how the government works. They're not going to go after every issue. Animal Yishufa, that's if they're partners of a Larisa, but if he's a sharecropper, Arisa the Kabapik, he is only responsible for his share, not for everybody else. In other words, partners, just like all the people in the valley have to pay the taxes together. In the olden days in Europe, it was for hundreds and hundreds of years, the government would tax the Jewish community, right? It was so what they would do is they would go to the head of the Jewish community and say, listen, you got to give us, 10,000 rubles. And the Jew, he had to collect it from all the people. It was his responsibility to collect it from all the people in the area. That's how it worked. They didn't have, checks and online payments and things like that, and like we have today. Bar masa me'abed. Let's say a person from the same, let's say you have a Jewish tax collector and he goes after Reuben. So he can take Reuben and he says, Shimon's not here now, so I'm taking the money from Reuben for Shimon too. And he could take that. He could take it as a pledge. He can make a demand and say, okay, you're paying for Shimon too. You go collect it from Shimon. Not immediately the bar la'arla, it's talking about what we call today arnona, the land tax, the real estate tax for karka, or the poll tax, the tax for every person, the high shasa of this year. In other words, when the Jewish man got the concession from the government to collect the taxes, and he says, listen, you're collecting for Reuben, Shimon's not around, he's not home, he went to Florida, so you got to pay for him too, and you go collect from him. You could do that for regular taxes of this year. Let's say the year has passed. You want to collect what they call arrears. You owe money for back taxes for previous years. It's too bad. It's passed already. In other words, the king has already been passed. They only worked in those days from year to year. It's not like today where you can refile, for 10 years going back, online, etc. The previous year the king is done with already. So he paid off the king for that. So if Shimon hasn't paid his taxes for previous years, the king is not going to get any money from him now. It's only going to be for this Jew himself who's going to collect it. You can't collect that. You can collect yourself. As a tax collector can go to the individual person and say, you got to pay me, you didn't pay me for last year, but he can't go to Reuben and say, you got to pay me for Shimon's also, and you go get it from Shimon. Yamarava. Hani the diary dori betochatchum. There are people, goyim, who basically fertilize your field. You brought them fertilize your field. I, for example, have many cats that I employ to fertilize my grass. They do that all the time, right? So people would do this. People had a business of this, right? They would bring their cows and they would to your field, and they would fertilize your field for you, right? So if they did it within the Tchum Shabbos, it means nearby, right? Also, likachman, you can't buy any animals from them. You know why? My time because the animals of the city, right? They're nearby, right? They're nearby. They do it close by. Mix up with their animals. So when you buy an animal from them, it might be a stolen animal that got mixed up with their herd, with their group. But if they're from outside and there's a far away outside the Tchum Shabbos, outside of 2,000 outside of time, because then the animals don't get mixed up. But however, if people from the town keep claiming against them, even if they're far away, you've stolen our animals. Even outside of them, it would be also because you might be buying stolen goods. Machas Rava called out, made an announcement. Some say it was Huna. The Sakulai, those who go up to Eretz Yisrael, and those who come down here to Babel. Hi Bar Yisrael, these are the rules. Hi Bar Yisrael, let's say you know some testimony for a guy on behalf of a guy. The guy did not ask you to come to his defense. And then you went on your own. You have a nice Goyish friend and you decided to testify. You volunteered to testify on his behalf. Against another Jew. He had a fight with a Jew and you testified for the guy against a Jew. He's excommunicated, he's put in Cherem, my time. Why? Not because you can't testify for a guy against a Jew if that's legitimate. But the reason if you testify in their courts, they don't follow our rules. My time. The law, by the way, this is the law of Bnei Noach, the 7 mitzvahs Bnei Noach. Our rules of justice about 2 witnesses and warning, etc. That's for Jewish law. But the Goyim don't go by that. They take out money. They can claim money based on one witness. So if you testify against a Jew, right, in favor of a Goy, you volunteer. It's one thing if you're forced, but if you volunteer to testify against a Jew, and based on your own testimony, one person's testimony, they're going to withdraw money from the Jew. It's not fair. It's an injustice. and you find, then you put him in below him in elachad. That's only if you're only one witness, right? I will betray, but if there's two people, in other words, it's you and another person, then it's okay because the Jewish law would be the same thing. B'chad nami, even one that we say you can't do it elabedin in the biggest, that's only by if you had like a village court, not a real court. Aval beidavar, but if it's a proper circuit court, a proper court also, then it's even a goyish court is okay. Why? Because inunami chad amumsa shadulei. Because even when one person, but the way the goyish courts worked in those days was similar to Jewish law, that if one person testified that Yankel owes money to Clyde, they would make Clyde take a shvuah, which is really the Jewish law too. One person, you need two witnesses to withdraw money, to claim money. One witness can force him to make a shvuah. Amar Rav Kavina be Rav Huna. When I was at Rav Huna's yeshiva or his house, some say the gears of Rav Kana, Iboilon, we had this question. Adam Choshev. What about if the testimony would be given by a very important person, a person of stature? The Samcha like they were relying on two people. Mafkimon Apune, they would take money out, they would withdraw money from one person, take away money from one person based on his testimony. Below Iboile Lasure, so therefore he shouldn't testify. Odil Makivon Choshevu, or since he's an important person, he can't escape that. And he's allowed to testify. That's the question. In other words, do you say since he's an important person and he knows testimony would be like almost like a chil Hashem, you can't escape that? Or do you say, no, simply, listen, they might just rely on your testimony and then it wouldn't be fair. What would you say there? That question stands. Amar Vashi, Hi ba Yisrael, the Zavan La'ara, Lavi Ametzra. Let's say a Jew, this is a real sad situation, it happens a lot in Chutzlarts. Who's the first guy in the neighborhood to sell his house to a Chinese person, and ruin the neighborhood, or you sell it to somebody, to a guy in a Jewish neighborhood. If a man sells his house or land to a guy, Ametzer by Yisrael, on the border of a Yisrael, Chavrei, and it's sold to him. Mishamtinale, again, he's put in Chayrim, he's excommunicated my time. What's the reason? Is it because we have a din of the bar mitzvah we're going to discuss at length in Bambatzia Mirz Hashem in a month or two, right? A few months. But what's the din of bar mitzvah? That if you have land and you're selling it, a house or land or whatever, you have to give right of first refusal to a neighbor because he's much better off having one big piece of land than selling it to a different person. So if that's the reason why if you sell to a guy on the border of a Jew, that's why we say that you can't that you put him in chayrim. Is that the reason? If it's because the din of bar mitzvah, Amar zavin me'akum v'zavin le'akum. I always have that issue in the Gemara: is zavin selling or buying? So it used to be, is it with a yud, without a yud? Here you see that zavin me'akum v'zavin le'akum. It all depends on the context. Zavin could be buying or selling, because he says zavin. If you buy from a guy, v'zavin le'akum, you sell to a guy. Lekim shum din mitzvah. There's no rule of din of bar mitzvah when it comes to guy. The reasons are explicit over there in Bamitzia that the rules of din of bar mitzvah only apply to Jews, not to goyim. Ella da'amrina, the reason why you put him in chayrim if he sold his land to a goy on the border of a Jew is because the Jew will tell him, "Arvosli aryeh mitzvah." You put a lion on my border, right? You put a lion on my border. Mashamtinale, you put him in chayrim ad dekabel kolon said the asamach mas. You put him in chayrim until he accepts upon himself any mishap, any trouble that comes from the goy. Many times what the goy would do is, let's say you had land over there, they would channel all the water into their land and take it away from the Jewish land that neighbors him. So the idea is it's not because of the real laws of din of bar mitzvah, it's simply because it's not fair. You put a goy next to me who might be violent against me and cause me losses. And because of that, you're allowed to put him in chayrim until the Jew accepts upon himself any trouble that emanates from the guy. So he says, that's what he said, you placed upon me like a lion right next to my land. You placed me a danger next to my land. Tomorrow's Gemara is Shabbos Gemara is Daf Kufya Dalid, and that's going to be on the podcast starting with the Mishnah, and that'll take us to the top of Kuf Tesvav Sunday, where we'll start from the third line. There's a 2 dots on the third line of Daf Kuf Tesvav, where we start on Sunday. All right, have a good Shabbos, everybody, and Purim Sameach.